Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over how to completely disassemble and reassemble a VFC MP5 GBB V2 magazine, as well as how to perform a modification to the magazine feed lips to improve feeding. So as usual, I'm going to go over the tools we're going to need for this job. So of course you're going to need your VFC magazine. We're going to need some Q-tips to help with cleaning. I've got some silicone oil here we're going to use to lube some of the parts. You're going to need a valve key. This one is a garter one, but there's a lot of different brands out there that will work for this. We're going to need some needle files. I've got a flat and round style needle file here. You can find these cheap around and they're very, very handy for doing any type of tech work. I've got a 90-degree pick, one of my favorite tools, made of hardened steel, very useful. I've got a 1/16 inch punch. We're going to use this to drive the pin out of the magazine body. I've got a flathead screwdriver that's the right size to fit in the fill valve here in the bottom. We've got a number 1 Phillips screwdriver we're going to use to remove some of the magazine baseplate screws. I've got a hammer I made back in high school. We're going to use that to drive out the magazine pin. And then finally we've got some multi-purpose synthetic grease. So with that being said, let's get started. To start the disassembly, make sure your magazine is completely out of gas. You want to make sure there's no gas in here. So if I push my fill valve in, you can see there's no gas left in here. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and take our fill valve and we're going to line up the 2 tabs with the fill valve tool into the valve key here. And you want to make sure that it's well seated in there before you start to turn. And then we're just going to loosen it a little bit. Now it's loose enough, I should be able to just spin it right out. And that's how you take out the fill valve. Okay guys, so for the next part of the disassembly, we're going to tap out the pin that holds the magazine outer body to the inner shell. So I'm going to use my 1/16 inch or 1.5 millimeter pin punch and my hammer here. And you can see I've got the magazine lined up with the edge of the table. So I'm going to place my pin punch in here. I'm going to hold the magazine down and I'm just going to tap out this pin. And there we go, we got our pin out. Okay guys, now that the pin's out, we can very easily just push out the inner magazine from the outer magazine. I'm just going to slide this down and it comes right out. Sometimes if you still have the fill valve, or excuse me, the release valve installed here, the button can get hung up in a few spots here and you'll just need to push it in to get it to slide through. So keep that in mind. So we'll set that aside and now we've got our inner magazine shell here that we're going to go over disassembling next. Alright guys, so I'm going to start at the top of the magazine and remove the BB follower, spring, the upper clip, and the magazine router. And for this part of the video, I recommend wearing safety glasses since the follower and spring are under tension and can come flying out. And I've definitely had them hit my safety glasses before while working on these by accident, so I'd recommend putting a pair of these on if you're not wearing glasses already. So to start, we're going to use our 90-degree pick, and I'm going to grip the magazine like this so that I'm holding the BB follower and the left feed lip in position so it can't come flying out. So you want to make sure you're squeezing that just lightly, and we're going to pull this clip back. So I'm just going to put my 90-degree pick into this spot here and just pull the clip back and up. Like I've got it right there. Next, I'm going to very carefully, you don't want to poke a hole in the gasket. I'm just going to use this to kind of lift the gas router up and out since it kind of comes out with the clip. So you can see I've got both of those started there. And now I can very gently wiggle the clip off of the magazine. And you want to be gentle here. It shouldn't take a lot of force to remove this clip. You really don't want to bend these tabs because if you do, you're going to need to get a new part potentially. So be careful there. So I'm going to set these aside. And now that that clip's been removed, I'm still keeping pressure on this. If I let go, the follower and spring is going to come out. So I'm just going to put my hand over here and I'm going to let off and just kind of catch this in my hand. So you can see if you do it slowly and gently, it really isn't too bad. And then we've got our spring and follower, as well as the left BB feed lip, and then the rest of the magazine shell. So that's doing the top portion of the MP5 magazine. Okay, so next we're going to go through the bottom of the magazine disassembly, and we're going to start by removing this outer base plate piece. And if you take a look, it's held in place in 3 areas. There's 2 folded over metal fingers, one here and one here, that hook it onto the gas body shell. And then on the back side, there's a small slot cut in the base plate that fits around one of the screws that holds the inner base plate to the gas body here. So I'm just going to very gently flex these 2 tabs back so that I can pivot this off of the base plate. You want to be careful here. You really don't want to bend these tabs too much. I'm going to use my pick to help me out. And there we go. We've got it removed. I'll set that aside. And now you can see that there's 3 Phillips screws that hold this inner base plate in place. So we'll be removing those next. Okay guys, so actually before I remove the inner base plate, I'm going to use my flathead screwdriver here and remove this fill valve. And one thing I want to point out here, it's really important to have the right size tool for this. You want to make sure that when the blade of the screwdriver is in the fill valve that you're engaged on both sides. See if I can focus the camera better here. Both sides of the fill valve. Otherwise, this fill valve is made of a really soft metal. It's going to deform, and then you're going to have a heck of a time getting it out and torquing it back down properly. So I've got like a 7mm wide flathead screwdriver with a 1mm wide or thick tip, and this seems to fit okay. A 7.5mm wide one would be even better, but this'll do for now. So I'm just going to install my screwdriver and just gently spin the fill valve right out. So now that the fill valve's removed, now I'm going to go ahead and take out this inner base plate. And we're going to use our number 1 Phillips screwdriver, and we're just going to remove these 3 screws. And here's our inner base plate. If you look closely, you'll also see our rubber gasket that goes around the perimeter here that's used to seal against the gas body. And that is the complete disassembly of the VFC MP5 GBB V2 magazine. So in this next portion of the video, I'm going to go over the feed lip modification. If we take a look at the feed lips on the V2 mags, so if we show that quickly here, hold it up to the camera, you'll notice on this side, the right feed lip, left in our perspective here, the opening for the BB to exit is a bit larger than on the left BB feed lip, or right side from our perspective right now. And you can kind of see that from this view. So the mod that we're going to do is basically open up the opening for the BB to exit on this side to match this side. And we're going to do that by just filing the feed lips using our round and flat needle files here. so until they match. And this is kind of a trial and error sort of process. Usually you can kind of visually tell. So if I take a look here and just look at the shape, I can see that I need to kind of scallop out this area a bit more in order to match the other side of the feed lip. So I'm going to take my file and I'm just going to start filing away at that. And really, if you go slow and just constantly check your work to make sure that you haven't filed too much, this is a pretty straightforward and easy modification. But before we begin that, one thing I want to point out: you do not want to get any of the metal filings from what we're about to do on the inside of your gas block. So I would recommend taking some masking tape and just covering all of these openings everywhere. You can even do this modification with the base plate installed and the fill valve in, and then just tape over the top here. You absolutely do not want to get those metal filings on the inside. They will wind up inside your gun. They will get on your seals and either cut the O-rings or cause a leakage to occur. So you want to make sure you're working in a very clean environment, and when you finish that you clean all the metal shavings from everywhere so that this part is dry with no filing residue anywhere, and that way you won't have to worry about any leaks. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start filing my feed lips here. I'm just going to take I'm going to stop a couple times and just show you some tips as I go along. Alright guys, so you can see here I've gone ahead and taped up all the openings on my magazine with some masking tape. Again, you really don't want to get any metal shavings on the inside of this. I've even taped the bottom just because I'm so paranoid about anything getting in there. We want to keep this pretty clean. So one other quick note before I begin. For those who haven't really used files much, you typically, when you're filing, you only want to move the file in one direction. So when I'm filing, I'm going to go like this and then come off. You don't really want to do the sawing motion. That will actually dull the file. You really only want to go in a forward motion like that and then come off and then bring the file back, and you keep filing like that. So just one quick tip before we begin. Okay guys, so I've just gone ahead and filed down the feed lips a bit where I'm pretty happy with it. If we do a quick check here, I'm just going to temporarily reinstall this, and we line up our eyeball with the center slot here, and you look at the amount of the feed lip in the back that's exposed. Let's see if I can show it on camera. We almost have an exact match. And then just looking at the profile of what I filed versus the right side, we're pretty close. I'm pretty happy with this. One thing I want to point out too is you should also kind of check it from this perspective, because I found mine, the feed lip kind of came out a little bit more, whereas this one was kind of angled in a bit. So I actually filed this front edge down a little bit to try and match that as well. But this looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and get this all wiped and cleaned up. One more thing I'm going to mention: when you finish and you feel like you've got the feed lips pretty close, you're going to want to take your file and just break all these edges. We don't want any sharp points left in the feed lip. You don't want to feel like you can cut your finger on any of these edges. So I would just take the file and at like a 45-degree angle, just kind of go around and just break all those edges till they feel nice and rounded over. Because remember, your BB is going to be traveling up through this follower and need to feed out this way. And as it's rolling over this surface, you don't want it to get sliced by any sharp metal. So just take your file and just lightly hit all those surfaces, feel it with your finger, and make sure there's no sharp spots inside the feed lip that you just modified. Sharp here. The edges are all nice and broken, and we shouldn't have to worry about our BBs being damaged by this. So I'm going to then use some Q-tips and some alcohol and just wipe down everything and get this all nice and clean so there's no chips or any debris left over. It'll wind up being nice. Alright guys, so this next part we're just going to do a quick test and see how we did with our feed lip mod. So if we kind of lightly reassemble the magazine halves here, what I'm going to do is load some BBs in and hold the magazine together with my hand. And we're going to use this pin punch to kind of pretend to be the loading arm, and we're just going to pop the BBs out one at a time into a cup here. and we're going to make sure that the pressure or force it takes to push each BB out is about the same, with this mod done. So you want to just line up this notch, and then we're going to load the spring in place like that. And then I take the left BB feed lip and put it into position. And now you can kind of just gently open the top and slowly feed this down until it's all the way in the feed lip, just like that. And now I'm going to use my left hand, and I'm just going to kind of hold it with a light clamp. If you let go, the spring and follower is going to go flying across the room. So make sure you hold on to this the entire time while we're doing this part. So now I'm going to load in some BBs. I'll load in a couple here. So we got a couple rounds in, and now I'm just going to put it over my cup here, and I'm going to pretend that this punch is my BB loader. I'm going to hold it about center, and I'm just going to pop one at a time. And I'm really feeling how much force it takes to push each of these out. So this is pretty close to even. It almost feels like this side though, which is, this side here, which is the one we were just modifying, is just a little bit tougher still. So I'm going to actually take this apart, and I'm going to do a little more filing, and then we're going to try again. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done another round of filing on the feed lips, and I've gotten it a lot closer. I went and deburred the edges and cleaned this up already, just like we did before. And if we take a quick look on camera, hold these together, you can see I was able to take a little bit more out up in this area to try and match it a bit better. So let's go ahead and test it out. Once again, make sure you're wearing your safety glasses. And we're going to look for the notch in the back of the follower and make sure that's facing backwards. We're going to load our spring in. Push the follower and spring down into the mag halves. Make sure we've got a good grip. And I'm going to load some BBs in. Okay, now we've got some BBs loaded in. Position our cup here, and we're going to start pushing rounds out. Again, I'm paying attention to how much force it's taking to push each of these out, and those are pretty nicely matched. So again, I'm just feeling as I'm pushing with this driver, and the amount of force it takes to pop each BB out of the magazine and into the cup is now pretty much equal between both sides. So I'm pretty happy with this result. So we're going to start working on reassembly next. Okay guys, so the first part of reassembly we're going to do is reinstall the base plate. I'm going to use just a tiny bit of super lube grease to apply to the seal here, just to give it a little bit of lubricant to help it when we go to reassemble. So I got my Q-tip here, I just broke in half. And we're just going to lightly go around the perimeter, just wipe just a little bit of grease on here. There we go. Yeah, so just a very tiny thin amount. It doesn't take much. And then we can go ahead and install it back into the bottom of the magazine, just like that. And then we can drop in each of our 3 screws, and we'll just go ahead and torque these back down. When you torque this down, you do not need to go extremely tight. I would just torque these until they bottom out, and then maybe just another quarter turn. Okay, and there we go. So if you notice, I kind of went in a little bit of a pattern there just to try and tighten down that seal more evenly. And then at the end, I just grabbed my screwdriver with like 3 fingers and kind of torqued it that way so that I wouldn't over torque the fasteners. So that's reinstalling the inner base plate. So next we're going to put the fill valve back in, and you really want to be careful with this step. Again, this fill valve is made from a soft brass material, and you can very easily, and I know this because I did it once, over torque the fill valve into the inner bottom plate, and you will actually just shear off the head of the fill valve, and then you'll be screwed. You'll have to order a new fill valve and hope you can get the sheared off portion of the body out of the threads here. Luckily, I was able to get mine out, but you may not be so lucky. So you want to be very careful. Before I go and reassemble it, once again, I'm going to apply just a thin amount of grease onto the O-ring here. So I'm just going to go around, and I'm just going to smear it around with my finger just quickly. Again, really tiny amount. It doesn't take much here just to lubricate the O-ring, and that's going to help it a lot when you go to screw it back into the body of the magazine here. So I'm going to get it started. And now when I torque this, I actually don't really apply any torque. You're just going to thread this down carefully with the screwdriver until it just sort of wants to stop. Right about there. So I applied barely any torque. So that's reinstalling the fill valve. We'll move on to the outer base plate next. All right, so next we're going to do this base plate. So you're going to want to take a look at your base plate and locate that thin slot feature that's cut into it. And we're going to line that up with the single screw here on the back. And that's going to more or less just sort of hook on there. And then we're just going to slide the front base part on until it clicks, just like that. And we can check our work. We can see the fastener head is poking through that slot. And then this side is fully seated. So now I'm just going to use my pick. And we're just going to carefully bend these tabs back down. So that's reinstalling the bottom base plate. Okay, so next we're going to reinstall the upper portion of the magazine components. So we've got our follower and spring again. We've got our left feed lip that we modified. We've got our gas router, and we have our clip. And these all sort of go together at the same time. So just as we did earlier during the feed lip mod, we're going to load the spring onto the follower, and we're going to reassemble that first. So I'm just going to preload that. Again, make sure the notch in the follower is facing towards the back. That's what your loading arm on your nozzle stops on when the magazine is empty. So then we're going to put our feed lip on just like I did, and we're going to push down the follower and spring until it's in place, just like that. And now I'm going to hold on to the magazine nice and strong so that the follower doesn't come flying out. Again, I would be wearing safety glasses right now during this step just in case. Then we can take our spring and clip, and looking at the clip, there's a small hooked portion right here. So we're going to want to install our gasket just like that relative to that hooked portion. If you can see it on the camera. And now, again, we want to be really gentle. We're just going to kind of angle this clip in. And if you look here, there's kind of a little slot. Let's see if I can show it on camera. A little slot in the BB feed lip that the clip's going to slip into. And that slot actually extends around to the back here. So that's where it's ultimately going to wind up. So if I kind of angle it in here to get it started and just kind of push on the clip a little bit, I still have a bit of a gap here. Now I'm going to simultaneously kind of work in the gas router, just really carefully. And I'll push the clip in a little bit more, and then push the gas router in, and I think I'll be able to, yep. So now I was able to get the gas router fully seated. If we take a look around, it looks like it's installed all the way. So that looks pretty good. Again, I'm keeping my grip strong here so this doesn't come flying out. And now we can push the clip all the way down so that the lip here on the back, or excuse me, the hook here on the back lines up with the lip and the gas body. And then I'm going to push the clip forward a little bit. Now, if you notice on mine, I actually don't quite have it seated all the way. There's still a gap here, and you're wondering, well, why is this? Well, if you remember, there's a slot in the back of the feed lips that runs along the back here, and the clip is just above that. So I'm going to, once again, use my pick here, and I'm just going to get in between the gas router and feed lip and push down on the clip, and then I'm going to slide the clip forward Oh, and I just felt it sort of click into place. So I'm pushing down with the pick, and then I'm pushing this clip forward. And now if we take a look, you can see I've got it hooked underneath. That gap's gone now. So now that's fully installed. So now obviously I can let go, and this can't come off because the clip's holding it in place. And that completes reinstalling the top portion of the magazine parts. Okay guys, so one thing I just noticed, it's a little hard for me to see when I'm doing it on camera, but I looked down in my gas router and I noticed that the inside wall here was kind of bulged out a little bit. So what I did is I actually took my pick and stuck it in this way. Again, I don't want to poke a hole in it, and just kind of pushed it forward so that the lower portion of the gas router just popped into its groove. And now if you look inside here, it looks correct. There's nothing bulging in the gas router. So make sure that yours looks like this after you've installed it, just so that there isn't any issues with gas leaking. So quick thing I noticed. Okay guys, so next we're going to put the outer magazine body back on the inner shell, and this is pretty easy. You're just going to slide it in from the bottom, just like this. Make sure that it's fully seated, and then we can take a look at our pinhole and make sure that the holes are lined up, which it looks like they are. Once you've got that lined up, you can take your pin and get it started here. And then I'm going to take my punch, and we're just going to lightly tap this back down into place. There we go. So that's reinstalling the pin. Now, one thing I'm going to mention on this, sometimes when you remove these pins, when you go to reinstall them, because the pin really only interferes on this relatively thin outer mag body shell, it doesn't have a whole lot of surface area to form the press fit on the pin that actually holds it in place. So sometimes I've found that this pin can get loose after you've removed it and you go to reinstall it. If that happens, I'm going to show you a quick trick here in a second to secure your pin. Okay guys, so we saw in the last segment I reinstalled the pin, but I had mentioned that sometimes these pins can get loose and want to fall out after you've removed them. So a quick way to just fix this without causing any issues with further maintenance is just use a little bit of super glue on the edge of the pin here to hold it in. So we're just going to put a very tiny drop of this stuff onto the tip of one of these toothpicks, and then we're going to apply it to this pin. So I'll do this really quickly here. So again, you don't need much. I'm actually going to pour it over the tissue. Just a little bit. And I'm just going to drop that in around the pin. I'll do a little more than that. There we go. And I'm just going to kind of swirl it around a little and actually give it a quick dab. That's it. That's all it really takes. You only want that little bit there, and that will be just enough to hold the pin in place. And if you ever have to remove and disassemble the magazine again, your pin, punch, and hammer is easily going to be able to just shear the glue and get the pin back out. So don't worry about this being a permanent modification or anything. The last step to reassembling the magazine now is to install our release valve. And before we do, I would recommend taking a look at your valve and just making sure that the armature is moving freely. So mine's moving pretty good. If it was a little bit gummy or if it wanted to stick, I would take a drop of silicone oil and just drop it in here and cycle the armature a couple times to circulate that oil around. You really want this to be moving freely so that when you're firing your airsoft replica, the gas performance can work as intended. So just make sure that's moving freely. Next, we're going to take just a little bit of our grease here, and I'm going to use another Q-tip. And we're just going to smear a light layer around. You want to do the static O-rings, so this one here and then this one closer to the body. So I'm holding the armature away just so I don't get grease everywhere. I'm just going to put a little bit there and a little bit there. So again, it doesn't take much. And then I can go ahead and just move that around with my finger just to lube those O-rings. There we go. So we got those nice and lubed up. Now we can drop this into the back of the magazine, and then using our valve key, make sure we get it seated in there good, and we're just gonna spin this in. And similar to the fill valve on the bottom, this really doesn't need much torque. I don't even use the Allen key. I just spin it in by hand until it stops. And again, make sure you're pressing in so that the teeth are really engaged on the release valve here. So there we go, that's reinstalled. And now our magazine is completely reassembled. Since we de-gassed this thing before we started, at this point I would recommend purging the mag before you go to shoot it. So you're going to want to hold the fill valve in and fill it with gas for about a second or two just to vent any of the trapped air that's in the gas body. Then you can let off the fill valve and finish filling up your mag, and you should be good to go. If you do notice a small leak from the base plate when you first reassemble it, I wouldn't worry too much. I would fill the magazine with gas and let it sit for a couple hours, and I think you'll find the gas pressure will force the gasket in the bottom back into position, and the magazine will seal back up. So this concludes the VFC MP5 GBB V2 magazine disassembly, reassembly, and the feed lip modification. If you have any questions, please throw them in the comments below, and appreciate you guys watching. Thank you.